The story begins with a desperate escape to flee a tragic fate that could destroy a life. The girl wept bitterly, unable to accept what was happening before her eyes. She was just an illegitimate daughter of humble birth. The rightful heir of the sacred Crimson Cross, master of the Dragon of Light, and guardian of the Acetrian Empire. His Highness, Crown Prince Caesar. He was the one, a man so incomparably handsome that the mere sight of him was captivating, and yet such a person was cursed. In the castle, everyone bowed their heads at the sight of him. The Crown Princess was about to arrive. The moment the Crown Princess stepped into the hall, the rightful heir of the 7 sacred crosses felt a sense of suffocation. 2 years, 2 whole years. It was this longing that sustained Caesar through the long and brutal war. It was Irenia Run. Everything was for her. She was his guiding light, the goal he would forever pursue. For years, the Crown Prince had eagerly awaited this reunion, where he could finally see her again. But when he saw the girl who walked into the palace, something inside him changed. A young girl with straw-colored curly hair and sky-blue eyes congratulated His Highness on his triumphant return. Seeing her, Caesar's heart sank immediately. He had a question for her. He wanted to know where his wife was. She didn't understand what he meant by his wife. The lady said she was right here and introduced herself as Giovanetta. Her face was filled with confusion upon seeing His Majesty dare to draw his sword in the palace. Caesar's fury was unleashed upon the poor girl. He asked one last time, demanding to know where his wife was. He just wanted to know where Irenia was. The disgrace of the Flores family, an illegitimate daughter forced to do chores like a servant, who limped due to a leg impairment, and the cursed Grand Prince of Acetria, the noblest yet most pitiful being in the palace. The curse of the Dragon of Light, awakened through the royal bloodline, had turned the once radiant prince into a monster. A limping, illegitimate daughter from a ducal house and a cursed prince. Such a perfect and pitiful pair. Their union seemed like a match made in heaven. But even so, Irenia was happy, so happy she had no regrets. As commander, Grand Prince Caesar Constantini Fiori was required to fulfill his military duties in place of the emperor. The Crown Prince decided to leave, to command the army against the United Empire and the Orcs. Irenia knew better than anyone that Caesar would die if he left, and she didn't want him to go. In the end, the Grand Prince of Acetria promised he would return. Powerless to intervene in the war, Irenia could only bear the fear and premonition of her lover's death alone. She clung to Caesar as if he were her only refuge in this world. But after the curse was lifted and he was healed, he left her. The girl wrote to him every day for 2 years, but never received a reply. In the palace where she was trapped, rumors swirled that Caesar was having an affair with Irenia's stepsister. Then, her stepsister revealed that the Crown Prince had confessed his love to her. She thought everything was just going back to how it should be. Perhaps after the curse was lifted, he couldn't bear the shame of being married to someone as lowly as Irenia. Now, she could never return to that place where she had no reason to exist. If she had known it would come to this, she would have preferred to live like a broken fool. Suddenly, the carriage will hit a thick branch on the road, and the carriage jolted violently. The confused girl was startled, and then the coachman shouted that they were under attack. Who would have thought they would be ambushed like this? The coachman still jumped off the carriage to check the situation outside. In that instant, he paid with his life as blood splattered everywhere. A terrible thought flashed through Irenia's mind. She guessed the robber's target was the Crown Prince, or perhaps her. Regardless, Irenia could not die so senselessly. Absolutely not. She had to live, because only the strong survive. The girl made a frantic decision, risking her life to run out. At that moment, she was driven by the desire to live at all costs. The strong survive, but the real question was, what could she do in such a terrible situation? Hearing the sounds of brutal fighting behind her, Irenia squeezed her eyes shut. She prayed for a way out, and turning around, she found a person in armor standing behind her. Definitely not one of the thugs who attacked her carriage. The girl was utterly desperate, trembling with fear. She pulled a small dagger from under her skirt and told the stranger not to come any closer. Through the curtain of pouring rain, she struggled to see who the person was. Who on earth would dare to do this? But the valiant knight was unusually silent. He was hidden in the shadows, only his hair swaying in the wind. When Irenia noticed the black hair that was so familiar, it was heartbreaking. Her breath caught for a moment. She came face to face with the man she had waited 2 long years for. It was Caesar. She took a deep breath, feeling his cold breath brush against her lips. She wondered why he had come. Now she understood. The crown prince had come to witness her end. Now that he was flawless, she was the only stain left on him. Going back 3 years, there was a rumor that a bride who married on a rainy day was destined to shed many tears. They said, given that he was a complete monster prince, she would be lucky if nothing happened today. Rin could never figure out why on earth they had brought her here. She was the illegitimate daughter of Duke Florus and had wandered the streets with her mother until she was 7. Her mother, Annalisa, had died of illness on the streets. In the Flores family, Irenia's status was at rock bottom, lower than a servant, perhaps even lower than a horse or a dog, the very bottom of society. Then one day, the Grand Prince chose her as his marriage partner. The Flores family had produced empresses for generations, and now it was Irenia's turn. It was then that the girl realized they had brought her home for this marriage. The eldest daughter, Giovanetta, was not even engaged yet. Because of the cursed prince, Irenia became the one to marry in her place. Grand Prince Caesar rarely appeared in public due to his illness, and his mother, the Empress, had committed suicide after he was born. Since then, people had started calling him the Monster Prince. Finding a partner for their cursed prince was truly a difficult task. Many noble families adopted orphans or married off their daughters at a young age to avoid a union with the cursed prince. The royal family received 4 marriage proposals from other families, but none were successful because all the candidates died. Now Irenia understood why they had brought her here. She was to become the crown princess, and as her dear mother said, she should be grateful considering her origins. The cause of death for those ladies was never announced. Everyone just assumed it was due to the crown prince's curse. By marrying the cursed prince, they were essentially sending Irenia to her death. She would become the most distinguished lady in the empire. What a great honor. Her mother's words were like the hiss of a viper. They handed a girl a cup of poison, and she had no choice but to drink it all. If this was her fate, Irenia would accept it. She would marry the Grand Prince. To enjoy a momentary change in social status, she could not miss this opportunity. This was her decision. Miss Flores would become the crown princess by her own choice, even if it pushed her to the brink. She knew the Grand Prince rarely appeared in public, but she never thought he would send a stand-in to the wedding. What was worse, they didn't even check the bride's body. But Irenia herself didn't know who she planned to stab with this. When she heard the clang of armor and the scrape of metal on the cement floor, she knew clearly that he had arrived. Irenia stood before the knights, who brought a locked cage containing the most dangerous of creatures. That was Prince Caesar. He had been drugged, so he would be unconscious. Seeing how carefully they isolated him from the outside world, it was hard to believe he was the Grand Prince. The knights were preparing to leave them here, and Irenia grew even more frightened hearing this. The most terrifying thing was that the drug would soon wear off, and the Grand Prince would wake up. At that moment, the girl was at a loss. No one at school had ever taught her about this. She knew Caesar was cursed, but the way they treated the heir to the throne was like some kind of animal. Approaching him, Irenia thought he looked like a normal person, but when she got a clear look at him, fear froze in her eyes. Hidden beneath the noble title of Crown Prince was a true beast. His hands were covered in scales and long claws. As the drug wore off, Caesar Fiore opened his eyes, which looked nothing short of demonic. He ground his teeth, grunting like a fanged beast waking from hibernation. Then he grabbed whatever he could find and smashed it violently on the ground. Then he jumped up himself. Irenia realized she had stumbled into a monster's den. She covered her mouth in terror and hid in a corner. She had never seen such raw destructive power, and she was now in real danger. Suddenly, Caesar's roaring stopped. Perhaps the drug was still in effect. It was simpler than that. The Grand Prince had just spotted a little gray mouse hiding in his room. His demonic eyes, which seemed to pierce through everything, filled the girl with pure fear and horror. No one thought this wedding meant anything. He was just an illegitimate child abandoned by the Flores family. Death was inevitable anyway. It didn't matter. This would be the 5th time. Just consider it a wedding gift. Someone like Irenia wasn't even worth a bite. So Giovanetta told her to at least try. If she had to be torn to pieces by a monster she was marrying, she would rather end it all with this knife. Irenia knew, she understood, she had long been abandoned. The only question was whether she would end her own life or die at the hands of the creature before her. Giovanetta had suggested she end it all with this. But there was one thing she didn't know. Irenia had never given up on life. always struggling desperately just to survive. So this knife would not be pointed at herself. In the end, only the strongest survive. The desperate girl picked up the weapon and ordered the monster to stay where he was. Caesar looked confused. He even double-checked if she was telling him to stay put. Although Irenia told him not to come any closer, the Grand Prince walked right up to her. But the girl's hand, though trembling, held the blade tightly, its tip almost touching his face. Suddenly, Caesar roared like a beast and fled in panic, clutching his head. He fell to the ground, making terrible sounds like roars and hisses. Something was wrong. Looking at him, she suddenly realized he was scared, but she didn't know what was terrifying him so much. Just then, thunder boomed outside, and lightning lit up the room, making Caesar flinch like a kitten. All right, so this beast was afraid of thunder. But that made no sense at all. Now, the man everyone privately called a monster was trembling because of some thunder. But if Irenia was seeing correctly, he wasn't a monster, just a frightened animal. It's okay. The loud noise won't hurt him. Nothing bad will happen. Seeing the Crown Prince's reaction, Irenia decided to keep trying to calm him. The thunder outside was so loud that Caesar was about to lose control right in front of her. He fell again in fear, hissing like a frightened animal. Irenia tried to soothe him, noticed a sword nearby, and carefully reached for it. As she was about to grab it, the enraged Crown Prince seized her and threw her to the ground. Caesar Constantine, like a crazed monster, bared his teeth and roared, reptilian patches appearing on his skin. The terrified girl screamed for him to let go. But the Grand Prince dug his claws into her dagger wound. A sharp pain shot through the bleeding wound, and Irenia flinched in pain. Her heart pounded when Caesar suddenly extended his long tongue and began to lick the bloody wound. The taste of blood seemed to give him some sort of dark satisfaction. He was so engrossed that he gently bit the wound on her arm. The wound became unusually hot, and every touch made Irenia wince and shut her eyes tightly. She suddenly told him to stop. In that instant, Caesar returned to normal. It was incredible that he became so docile again after drinking that blood. Okay, now it made perfect sense. He wasn't a monster, more like a large wild animal. It was so strange to do something like that and then fall asleep immediately. Caesar's behavior was odd, but it didn't seem like he wanted to harm the girl. In that case, Irenia guessed he might be going through a situation similar to hers. But for now, the most important thing was that she had survived, even next to such a beast. The next morning, a knight was sent to clean up another body. He thought it would be better to be more prepared this time. But when the knights opened the door, they couldn't believe their eyes, seeing the bride alive and the prince sleeping in her arms. Hearing the clang of armor, Caesar woke up quickly and pounced on the men like an animal. Irenia wasn't scared at all. She jumped on his back, begging him to stop. This was completely different from the Crown Prince's previous life. His anger vanished, but he didn't understand why. As his fiancée, Irenia thought he shouldn't act like this. She would make sure he would never be hurt again. She sincerely hoped he would behave better. This scene of taming a monster was simply unbelievable. The knights were all frozen at the door. They were dumbfounded and decided to report this to His Majesty, the Emperor, immediately. Soon, rumors spread that the Grand Prince had spent his first night with his new bride. The bride had a few scratches, but she was alive. Looking at the prince's other servants, it was hard to believe she was still alive and not seriously injured. When the news reached the palace, Empress Cornelia took a keen interest in it. Cornelia had been Emperor Guido's mistress since he was the crown prince and became empress after his wife's death. Her son, Matthias, the second prince, was also born while she was still a mistress. 20 years later, he was recognized as an heir. The empress was sensitive about the matter of illegitimate children, so the handmaiden felt she shouldn't mention that the new bride from the Flores family was also illegitimate. Now that they were officially married, Cornelia felt they needed a place to live. So she ordered them to live in the Malachite palace. The crown prince's new wife was named Irenia. People were dying like flies. It was hard to say who knew how long this one would last. Perhaps she would even end up replacing the empress. If that were to happen, Cornelia had the handmaiden send a message telling her they should have tea together sometime. Hearing the details of the grand prince's wedding night, the emperor thought it was a miracle. The girl was actually still alive, truly a descendant of the Flores family. It seemed everyone thought Irenia was doomed. Even she herself thought so. And the bloodstains on the clothes proved that yesterday's marriage was still valid. So now no one could deny their union was legitimate, at least as long as Irenia was alive. The place arranged by Her Majesty the Empress looked rather ominous and desolate. The palace handmaiden was sure the girl understood the Empress's intentions. Everything happened so fast, and now Miss Flores was clearly not happy with this residence. After saying she liked it very much, Irenia asked her to convey to Her Majesty the Empress that she was grateful for the sentiment. Then the handmaiden told her to rest well, saying she wouldn't disturb her. Although this was the imperial palace, not much happened here. But honestly, compared to the treatment Miss Flores received at the Flores estate, this place was paradise. Suddenly, a servant entered the room, offering to help the young crown princess with her bath. However, Irenia said she could handle it herself. From now on, she would not need help with her bath. Soon, a lavish feast was laid out in the palace, but His Highness was late. According to the palace servants, from now on, His Highness Prince Caesar and the crown princess would live together in the green Malachite palace. They might call him the Cursed Prince, but he was still a member of this country's royal family. As long as Caesar was around, he was a shield. Hearing that His Highness the Prince was about to arrive, Irenia was overjoyed and prepared to welcome him. But her smile vanished when Caesar was brought in, chained and muzzled like a dangerous, rabid dog. The horrified girl shouted that you can't treat a person like this. She was immediately warned not to get close, or she risked being bitten. Just then, a beastly roar erupted. The crown prince went berserk before their eyes and began to tear at his chains. The knights immediately surrounded him, ready to fight the crazed crown prince. Watching them subdue him with rough and disrespectful force, Irenia began to plead for them to stop, but it was all in vain. The knights used force and weapons to stop the prince's resistance, pinning him to the ground. They made a swift decision to tie him up and take him away. This was not a scene for the faint of heart. Irenia couldn't believe anyone would think this was okay. But the knight advised her not to touch the muzzle and chains if she wanted to keep her fingers. He also gave the girl something she would need, then bowed and left. Now it was just her and the crown prince. The girl couldn't comprehend any of this. These wounds weren't there this morning, which meant they were new. And this muzzle, Caesar couldn't possibly eat properly like this. Special food had been prepared for His Highness. They brought cut meat and tongs. As Irenia began to feed him through the muzzle, like feeding a tiger through a cage, she realized that to them, Caesar was less than an animal. Seeing Caesar suffer so much, the girl had no choice but to set him free. She remembered the knight's warning and began to doubt herself. But they still couldn't treat a person like that. Whatever the risk to herself, Miss Flores decided to help him remove that thing immediately. The crown prince, terrified and angry at the whole world, struggled and roared the entire time she was removing the muzzle. After freeing him, Irenia looked into his eyes, and there was something mysterious in them. Everything seemed to be okay. But then Caesar lowered his head again and began to writhe like a snake. He muttered to himself, and then a switch was flipped. The crazed crown prince broke free from his chains and liberated himself. Miss Flores immediately remembered the knight's words, who had warned her not to touch the muzzle and chains for her own safety. He had told her that if anything went wrong, to throw this bottle directly in His Highness's face. Remembering this, the girl steeled herself, ready to fight for her life. She was scared out of her wits. She was still terrified by His Highness's horrifying appearance. Seeing the bottle in her hand, Caesar completely lost control, as if he was about to pounce. Irenia tried to calm him with words, but was met with a violent swipe. The crown prince's anger was devastating, whether it was hiding fear or was simply a tool he used. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate, and hate inevitably brings suffering. In this story, Caesar was powerless. Irenia now realized that if she did this, she would be no different from those people. She looked at her hand in pain and found it was scratched again. Come to think of it, something similar had happened last night, but Caesar had quickly returned to normal. The girl couldn't be entirely sure, but it was a risk she had to take. If the crown prince wanted it, Miss Flores would offer it to him without hesitation. The moment a drop of blood hit the floor, the master smelled it and lunged forward. With a desperate hunger, he began to lick and nibble at the injured hand, licking the bright red blood. It turned out he found peace through blood. Thank goodness no one was around. It was well known that the prince was cursed and craved blood for life. If anyone found out about this, I can't imagine what people would say. That's enough. The girl quickly pulled her hand back. At that moment, Caesar calmed down and nuzzled his face against her. Inhaling the fragrant scent of her young vitality, the prince couldn't help himself. He wanted more, thinking he wanted more blood. Irenia started to tell him to stop, assuring him that it was enough. But overcoming his deadly craving was not easy. This beastly impulse made Caesar pounce on the girl and pin her to the floor. When his warm tongue touched her neck, Irenia froze and her heart began to race. Her whole body became limp and heavy, unable to stop his actions. It seemed there was no stopping him now. He was burning inside, needing to feel every inch of her skin. It was all too intense, and Miss Flores felt very strange. When she could bear it no longer, she screamed for the prince to stop at once. Hearing that he must stop, Caesar seemed somewhat at a loss, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. If he continued like this, she might not survive. Caesar didn't want that, and Irenia didn't want to die. It seemed he actually understood death, or at least he didn't want his wife to die. The girl looked into Caesar's eyes and introduced herself as Irenia. Annalisa called her Run. After some effort, the crown prince managed to say the short version of her name. So they were husband and wife now, even though no one thought Irenia would survive this marriage. The handmaidens who cursed her and thought she would die, this dilapidated Malachite palace, and the Empress who rejected both Irenia and Caesar. Caesar's current situation didn't matter. What mattered was that he was the only one she could rely on. Miss Flores was on his side. They were in the same boat. That being the case, she told him to tell her if anyone bullied him again, like they did before, like on those previous nights, or those people who treated him like trash. The terrible memories turned the crown prince back into a raging beast, and he just kept repeating the word no. He said the negative word more clearly than any other. He must have gone through that countless times. Irenia asked him to promise, and showed him the gesture for swearing an oath. Surprisingly, Caesar understood immediately. He no longer looked so terrifying and ruthless. At dinner, the girl told her husband to eat by holding the fork like that, but he wasn't very skilled yet. She showed him how to eat, but he just opened his mouth like a baby bird. In his current state, Caesar was acting less like a husband and more like a 5-year-old child. Suddenly, the dining room door was pushed open, and a third person walked in. Seeing Prince Caesar, the lady cried out anxiously. The master immediately recognized the woman and even called her by name. He didn't expect to see Mercedes. The kind old woman apologized for barging in and introduced herself as Mercedes Alonso, Prince Caesar's servant. She had been His Highness's wet nurse and had always taken care of him. If she was Caesar's wet nurse, then she must have been a handmaiden to the late Empress Adelheid. She had noticed Caesar becoming more and more sensitive, and the knights had started resorting to violence, and more frequently. Hearing this, Irenia couldn't understand how things had gotten so bad if Mercedes knew everything. The servants had rushed over as soon as they found out the two of them had moved into the palace. The truth was, she felt terrible, but she simply didn't have the power to stop Her Majesty Cornelia. Then Irenia realized that if she was the late Empress's personal handmaiden, she must have come from a noble family. Yet those hands were rough from labor. All of this must have been to protect Caesar, a prince in name only. More importantly, Mercedes wanted to know how the girl did it. No one had ever been able to make His Highness Caesar so obedient. He had even started to refuse the touch of his servants. Thank goodness Miss Flores had managed to calm His Highness Caesar. She couldn't say she calmed him by feeding him her blood, because no one would believe it. They would surely say Irenia was controlling him with black magic and accuse her of witchcraft. When she was still struggling on the streets, she had seen how they dealt with witches. They would tie the witch to a donkey, drag her through the streets all day, throw stones at her, and then hang her on a cross. Then they would burn the body until the last sign of life was gone. It was the harshest punishment when they refused even the smallest mercy of a quick death. So Irenia had to keep this secret at all costs. Suddenly, Caesar reached out and touched his wife, as if he could sense her anxiety. Seeing this, Mercedes thought that His Highness Caesar really cared for the young crown princess. At night, Irenia returned to her own room to sleep. It was time for Caesar to rest as well. Before leaving, Mercedes reminded her of the upcoming tea party with Her Majesty the Empress. Empress Cornelia. Irene also had much to prepare for tomorrow, and as she was lost in thought, she suddenly sensed something was amiss. She lifted the covers and saw the prince. Caesar tickled her foot and grinned. She didn't know what to do with him, thinking this was too crazy, and she realized she was in a predicament. The moment she invited Caesar under the covers, the guy was overjoyed and flopped down beside her. They were husband and wife, after all, so sharing a bed wasn't such a big deal. It had been a long time since Irene had fallen asleep like this, feeling someone else's body heat, and she moved a little closer. If they slept holding each other like this, it would be warmer and easier to fall asleep. The girl was exhausted, her stamina completely drained. Just as her heavy eyelids were about to close, unable to hold on any longer, Caesar leaned over and gently kissed her cheek. Meanwhile, rumors that the prince's new bride was still alive spread even wider. Matthias had expected to see another cold corpse. Now he was sure that those old conservative codgers would be ecstatic. His full name was Matthias de la Rosa, the second prince of the empire. Even though the crown prince Caesar had serious mental problems, the traditionalists still supported his claim to the throne. To be honest, they probably just wanted a puppet emperor. Three major powers had formed on the continent: the human Assyrian Empire, the Elven Forest, and the Stoic Dwarven Federation. The Assyrian emperor needed to gain unanimous recognition, and the other two monarchs both hoped for an emperor to their liking. This lucky girl came from the ducal house of Florus. The second prince had always thought they were descendants of the heroes who hunted the light dragon. When the question arose of whether the blood of the sage could truly suppress the dragon's bloodline, it turned out their daughter was an illegitimate child. Considering she was a descendant of Cosmo, this wasn't surprising. But who knew if Cosmo's lineage truly meant anything? Matthias guessed her mother must have been furious at the time, but honestly, what else could be said? More importantly, he had never taken pleasure in watching women die. If he had known she would pull through, he would have shown up all the same. The second prince would soon meet her in front of everyone. A maid was accused of touching Her Highness's belongings. You see, she was afraid of being punished. The girl tearfully swore it wasn't her, but the accusations continued. Everyone believed she was guilty, but the real culprit who touched the item was another girl. It seemed Irene had an unpleasant dream this morning. With his eyes closed, the crown prince truly looked like an incredibly handsome nobleman. Suddenly, shouts and arguments erupted in the hallway. The girl had no idea what was happening. The palace maids were all gathered in the hallway, as if plotting something. To see what was going on, Irene stepped out of the room and saw the crowd. The scene was a commotion and looked suspicious. One of the maids was trembling like a leaf in the wind, huddled on the floor. It turned out this child had touched Her Highness's jewelry. The other servants confirmed that Delphina did it, and they thought the child should be thrown out. Hearing this, Irene froze on the spot, not understanding where this hostility was coming from. She turned to a servant and asked her to explain everything. That was Elda, the head maid here. She had heard that the new princess was just an illegitimate child of unknown origin. While cleaning this morning, Sarah saw Delphina touching Her Highness's valuables, so they all came here to report it. Irene was all too familiar with that kind of look. It was the same look the servants gave her when she first walked into the Florist mansion. Being an illegitimate child with no backing, hated by the lady of the house, was worse than being a maid. Even maids could get promoted and gain influence. They could save money and then find better jobs. But Irene wasn't allowed to do any of that, not with her position in this house. She was forever tied to the Florist surname. Bearing their name, for over a decade, she was treated worse than a servant. That's why she could see them for who they really were. It was quite an eye-opener, making one wonder if her valuables were truly missing as they claimed. After being reminded that this was Elda's responsibility, the princess said this was completely out of line. She accused the head maid of failing to look after her master's valuables and failing to train the servants properly. Worst of all, Elda was making a scene at her door before the mistress was even awake. Now, people only talked about Lady Irene, a woman with no background who fearlessly married the monster prince. It turned out they were all sent here on the orders of Countess Elvira. If that was the case, their rudeness was a stain on Countess Elvira's honor. Since the servants weren't afraid of the new princess, she personally vowed to report their disrespect to the countess. And to do that, she had to pull out something even more stunning. Under the princess's pressure, Elda fell to her knees, admitting her mistake and that she had messed up. She apologized profusely, but those words kept echoing in Irene's mind. Mistak, sin error. People say a bride who marries on a rainy day will shed many tears. To be honest, it all started on the morning of her wedding day. A small act of revenge, if you will. But in this palace, survival meant setting the rules. Expecting the servants to make a bigger scene, Irene made it clear she would not tolerate any more disgraceful behavior. She dismissed everyone, but then she noticed the maid, the one who had touched Her Highness's valuables. Then she suddenly realized that Delphina was the mastermind behind it all. Come to think of it, Irene had the same dream last night. Maybe she was wrong, but she was sure last night's dream was identical to what was happening now. The princess felt like she might be going crazy, and she told them to go out and find a knight. She ordered them to summon a knight immediately and told the others to stay put. As soon as the knight appeared, Miss Flores turned to Sarah and asked what was in her apron pocket. Seeing the maid's terrified reaction, the lady ordered the knight to check. The knight complied and grabbed the servant, but she insisted she didn't steal the jewelry. It was Delphina who did it. Even so, the knight pulled Her Highness's jewelry from her pocket. Irene was sure they were all shouting that Delphina had stolen the shiny things. But let's be honest, theft was a serious crime with severe consequences. Despite the maid's pitiful pleas, the princess ordered them all to be taken away for questioning. If she hadn't seen through the trap, that girl would have been expelled. Delphina was endlessly grateful for this mercy. Back in the bedroom, our girl still didn't understand what had happened, but she knew what was most important now. She needed people she could truly trust in this palace. Just then, the monster prince finally woke up. He looked far less intimidating in the morning than usual. Irene was happy to see him. She touched his cheek, and Caesar actually blushed. He was so sweet and gentle. The crown prince had been through too much. For a guy who always handled difficult situations like a brute, Irene would help him turn things around. Their fates were now intertwined. For Caesar's sake, and for her own, she had to surround them with people she could trust. To achieve this, she needed to talk to the Empress. In the middle of the conversation, the voice of Baroness Aranzo echoed in the room. She was looking for His Highness, Caesar. Seeing him snuggled up to the princess like a kitten, the Baroness realized they seemed to be getting along well. Actually, she had something to tell them both. The thing is, they had a tea party scheduled with Her Majesty the Empress this afternoon. The timing was perfect, as Irene had something she wanted to ask Her Majesty. Hearing that she just needed to know if she had the authority to appoint new staff, Baroness Aranzo was stunned. She had heard about the commotion today and thought the princess had handled it very well. Those maids had gone too far. Miss Flores was honestly a bit caught off guard. The way those servants treated Caesar was completely unacceptable. Everyone in this palace served Countess Elvira. They acted as if they had the Empress herself backing them, even if only indirectly. But that was no excuse for them to treat others that way. Her Highness the Princess asked Mercedes for a favor, as she was well aware of her current situation. She hadn't brought any maids with her from the family estate. She didn't trust anyone in this palace. As soon as Irene asked for her help, even if it was just until she found her own handmaidens, the Baroness happily agreed. Even if Mercedes' abilities were limited, she would be honored to serve you. Suddenly, a maid came in and reminded Her Highness that she needed to change for the luncheon. Before the tea party, it turned out Caesar wasn't attending. The Empress didn't want to face the Crown Prince. Hearing their conversation, the Crown Prince suddenly became very angry, and when Cornelia was mentioned, he said no. From the fierce look on his face, he was dead serious and knew exactly what he was saying. It felt like the thing Irene had given him last night was starting to wear off. In this situation, she asked for a minute alone with the prince, saying she needed to talk to him in private. No matter how many times she had seen that look, it never got any easier to take. Caesar needed this girl more than anyone realized, drawn to her like an animal. They couldn't leave any marks where they could be seen, because Irene had a meeting with the Empress. Every place the Crown Prince touched with his tongue made the girl wish he would touch somewhere else. To distract him, the girl gently broke a wound, letting some blood flow out. Smelling the blood, Caesar's expression changed instantly. He reached confidently for the bleeding wound. The moment his hot tongue touched her wound, the girl was overwhelmed by the strange sensation and closed her eyes. She wasn't sure if she should let this continue. Irene could only hope she hadn't messed things up with Caesar. On the way to see the Empress, Miss Flores had asked them to keep things simple. They probably already disliked her, so the best she could do was not to draw attention. It was no secret that she had injured her arm last night and received treatment, but it would be a problem if they made an issue of the wound. Now, Lady Irene was finally ready to see Her Majesty. She would be back soon. Caesar didn't want her to go and was furious, but there was nothing she could do, as His Highness was making things difficult for the Crown Princess. The Baroness decided to stay with him for the time being. The Crown Prince just needed to let her go for a little while, but all he could do was say no. Soon, Her Highness, the Crown Princess Floris, arrived at the Imperial Palace. It seemed they had deliberately not told her where she was going. Of all places, the greenhouse was the farthest from the Emerald Palace. Apparently, they did this knowing she had difficulty walking. The Crown Princess will pay her respects to Her Majesty. The Empress. After the two ladies finally met, a heavy silence filled the air, thick with tension. Irene bowed to Her Highness, praised the Holy Cross Palace, and greeted the Empress. But Lady Cornelia did not welcome her warmly. She eyed the princess with suspicion, as if she didn't trust her. By the time Miss Floris finally reached the greenhouse, her legs had completely given out. Her legs were weak with exhaustion, and she almost fell if not for Delphina, catching her just in time. Countess Elvira asked the princess to come to the table and dismiss the others. The Empress was a powerful woman who held supreme authority, an embodiment of beauty and strength. First, she wanted to know how the princess was finding life in the palace, and if she was comfortable. The Empress received no answer, but Irene had something to tell her, and it was about His Highness the Prince. The problem was the Imperial Guard or possibly the servants. She wasn't entirely sure someone was hurting the prince. He was covered in wounds, and they even used chains and a muzzle to restrain him. After hearing this, Empress Cornelia simply snapped her fingers silently, and someone immediately handed her a pipe. The Empress took a puff and asked the young princess what she expected of her. Irene was fed up with this sense of injustice. She felt Her Majesty wasn't listening to her at all. Cornelia believed that to be treated like a human, you first had to be one. When she asked what defines a human, her parrot immediately shrieked the answer. A human. And that was the truth. You had to act like a human to be called one. The Empress was convinced of this, as she had never seen the Crown Prince Caesar act like a human. A human must walk on two legs, use tools, and speak a human language. But just as the Empress's parrot began to speak like a human, complimenting her hat and greeting her, Irene was terrified. Just then, the Empress asked her to explain the difference between the Crown Prince and the bird. If you thought about it, in some ways, the bird was better than the Crown Prince. At least Cornelia could control it with one hand, but she was more worried about the Crown Prince, that completely out-of-control beast. Of course, you needed to use a firm hand to manage him. The Empress was certain that without some harsh discipline, he was simply uncontrollable. It was only natural to restrain a beast. She couldn't go around calling him a beast. He was a damn prince. The Empress burst out laughing at this. It seems the princess has a sharp sense of humor. This might be the funniest joke Cornelia has heard all year. Seriously, His Highness was truly different. The way he lost control at the smell of blood, like a complete madman. His left arm began to change, transforming into a reptile-like limb. And those dull, beast-like eyes. Anyone would call it a curse without hesitation. But Irene needed to remember something. That smile, those gentle eyes, they also belonged to Caesar, to the prince who was human. Now the Empress saw it clearly. This little thing actually cared about her husband. For a nobody with no background, clinging to a fool of a husband was probably her only way out. Hearing what the Empress had just said, Irene almost curled up in anger. They didn't even acknowledge Caesar's title, let alone treat him as a human. And Miss Floris was in the same boat, treated the exact same way. She couldn't convince someone who didn't see her as a person. So she decided to ask the Empress if she would acknowledge Caesar if he started acting like a human. Irene would do it. She would make Caesar walk on two legs, use tools, and speak like a human. But the idea of taming that beast struck Cornelia as ridiculous. However, if the princess actually managed it, she was willing to acknowledge him. The Empress would give her the dream of the blue flame. The dream of the blue flame was a necklace passed down to the ruler's wife since the founding of the empire. According to Cornelia, wearing it in public was equivalent to declaring her full support for the princess. This not only meant the crown prince was acknowledged, but also that he was a contender for the throne with the backing of the royal family. She thought this should be enough for Irene to get the recognition she sought. The Empress gave the girl 3 months until the summer ball. One more thing, she hated liars. So if the princess tried to get by with empty promises, she would make her pay. After the meeting, the second prince was waiting for her. He mentioned he'd heard Miss Floris had tamed the madman, so he had expected a rough, strong lady, but she was just the ordinary girl Irene from the Flores family, and she had just met his mother. That was a fearsome and merciless face, the face of Empress Cornelia. If he called the Empress his mother, then the girl had just greeted the second prince, Matthias. He approached and told her she didn't have to be so nervous. It was obvious that even his movements were like the Empress's. However, Miss Flores had never given him permission to use her first name. Matthias knew he had messed up. He thought then that he should call her sister-in-law. If the second prince had no other business, Irene was ready to leave, but he quickly stopped her. Just then, her legs gave way, and she fell forward, right into the guy's arms. Matthias pulled her close and told her to be careful. He crossed the line and kissed her bare shoulder. He was just curious if the idiot knew how to be intimate with a woman. Horrified by what just happened, Irene froze. Matthias felt his sister-in-law was having trouble with her legs, so he ordered a sedan chair to be brought for her. All the way back to her room, she kept replaying everything that had just happened. She had never heard such a vile insult. Suddenly, she heard someone call her name and guessed it was Caesar. No one else would enter the bedroom besides her, so it was a mystery where Caesar had been hiding. Just then, the crown prince crawled out from under the bed, looking disheveled and pathetic. It seemed he had been under the bed the whole time. Caesar was covered in dust, as if he had used himself as a mop. He looked so ridiculous that Irene couldn't help but laugh. This magnificent palace, and her who didn't fit in. Everywhere she went, scrutinizing and cold gazes followed her. Then there were the Empress and the second prince, always looking for a chance to, well, make her life difficult. Even though she felt like she could be crushed at any moment, looking at Caesar right now, she felt free. Still, Miss Flores couldn't let Caesar stay so scruffy. She had promised to make him see his true self, and it was time for a real change. The first thing the princess did was call for Mercedes. The Baroness had been looking for His Highness for a while. The problem was they needed to give Caesar a bath. He was too dirty. Hearing this, Mercedes looked confused, as if something was wrong, but she quickly recovered and promised to prepare everything to help with the bath. Her hesitant reaction worried Irene a little, but it was just a bath. Surely nothing bad could happen. The girl decided to wait and see. Suddenly, she heard a blood-curdling scream. Caesar stormed out of the bathroom in a rage. He was so focused on something that he ran out naked, not even bothering to get dressed. He lunged at Irene with raw instinct, pinning her to the bed. He pressed against her, his body uncomfortably close. Just then, the terrified Baroness rushed into the room with a towel. It seemed the crown prince had a complete meltdown over the bath. His Highness wouldn't even let them pour water on him, so they were at a loss. It was difficult for everyone. Irene hadn't expected things to be this bad. If he couldn't even take a bath, the future was bleak. But the princess decided to give it a try. Hearing this, Mercedes expressed her doubts, as His Highness probably had no experience with it. To help Caesar survive, she had to bathe him. Things had to change. Supporting each other was what a married couple should do, so she was going to try. Irene did have experience with laundry and chores, but she had never bathed someone before. Despite this, she rolled up her sleeves, showing she wasn't about to give up. A servant first tried to run hot water, which immediately enraged the crown prince. In a fit of beastly rage, he lunged at the child, leaving a deep gash. The situation turned very ugly. That servant was being blatantly disrespectful to the prince. Because of what happened, Irene knew how much trouble they could be in and ordered everyone to stop and back away immediately. Still, the girl was a bit shocked at how Caesar had managed that. Mercedes thought the princess finally understood that His Highness just couldn't be bathed. Since he hated it so much, the Baroness decided to take him back to his room, or he would catch a cold like this. Realizing the problem was that Caesar simply hated bathing, Irene told everyone to wait. She admitted she had been too casual before, but they couldn't just give up now. Even if Caesar was completely against it, they had to finish this bath. Worried about what would happen next, Mercedes tried to stop the princess, asking what she intended to do. Seriously, they had to finish this bath. Irene had promised the Empress she would make Caesar more manageable. What they needed to figure out now was what Caesar needed. Mercedes understood, and now she decided to leave the rest to Her Highness. Seeing how the servants had treated Caesar in the past, Irene could understand why Mercedes was so overprotective of him. At least she was the only one in the palace who had voluntarily helped Miss Flores. First things first, she decided to find out why Caesar hated bathing so much. Just mentioning the word made him angry, and he started roaring about how much he hated it. To convince him, she said that bathing was pleasant, that his body would get warm, and he would feel relaxed. Putting your hand in the warm water, your body relaxes, and it feels good. From Caesar's reaction, it seemed he wasn't entirely uninterested. So, it was entirely possible he didn't like being bathed by servants, considering how badly those people treated him. If he didn't like being washed by others, then Irene would teach him to wash himself. She would help him this time, but she wasn't going to rush it, now that she thought about it. The crown prince hadn't reacted to the servant's blood earlier. She thought he would go crazy over any blood, but that wasn't the case. This time, Flores poured water from above, and it went much better than she expected. But there was one thing she hadn't considered. Teaching him to bathe meant she would have to, well, demonstrate it for him herself. Suddenly, she couldn't take it anymore, saying this won't work while buttoning up Caesar's clothes. She told him to hold his shirt tight so it wouldn't come loose. Even if they solved one problem with the teaching, she still had to, well, demonstrate. Previously, Caesar would only start eating after Irene took the first bite. She had to teach him. This was all for his education. After all, while Miss Flores was undressing, she told Caesar to turn around for a moment. When she was ready, she told him he could turn back. At that moment, she stood there without her dress. All she could think about was not wanting to expose her legs again. To be honest, it could be called an accident. Just then, Giovinetta accused her sister, saying she had fallen due to her own carelessness. The servants looked at her as if she were trash. Her stepmother, Celestina, and her stepsister openly mocked her. And her own father, Gasparo, who only cared about parties and pleasure, paid it no mind. After that, no one even bothered to check on little Irene. Weeks later, when the whole thing came to light, her leg was beyond saving. From then on, Irene became an object of humiliation and ridicule. Everyone insulted her and treated her like worthless trash. She was afraid Caesar would find her disgusting too, but the fool just started sniffing her clothes. He didn't even understand what she was worried about, which might actually be a good thing. To teach the prince how to wash, Miss Flores slowly climbed into the tub. As the hot water enveloped her body, it felt so comfortable and soothing. Suddenly, Irene splashed water at Caesar. He froze, bewildered like a kitten caught in the rain. The girl burst out laughing. Seriously, the prince was too cute. She couldn't stand it. Finally, she told him not to be such a spoilsport and pulled him into the water with her. Caesar splashed into the tub, and now they were both in it. It turned out this wasn't so bad. In fact, the girl liked being clean. At the Flores mansion, she couldn't just take a bath whenever she wanted. So Irene wanted Caesar to smell nice, too. She poured some sweet-smelling bubble bath into the tub and let the boy have a sniff. Suddenly, Miss Flores felt the soap touch her wound and immediately noticed Caesar's reaction. A thought flashed through her mind. He was going to take something that belonged to her again. But his movements were so gentle, as if he were trying to heal the wound. It turned out it wasn't that hard. You just had to find the right way to deal with a frightened animal. When Caesar was finally all clean, all that was left was what was under the robe. Even so, Irene couldn't help him wash those private parts. She thought he could handle the rest himself. So she prepared to leave, but the crown prince grabbed her and wouldn't let her go. He simply couldn't do it himself. While in the water, Miss Flores had told him he couldn't do that. She was happy that he trusted her, but he was running around naked. No, that wouldn't do. Thankfully, the plan to give him a gift if he handled it himself worked. Irene told him to wash up well, rinse off, and dry himself with a towel, and then she would give him a reward. Caesar pressed his wife's hand to his face and asked her to give him the reward. He probably wanted her to pat his face. As long as he finished his bath properly and came out, Irene would do that for him. Only then, as if by a miracle, Caesar really did finish his bath and come out by himself. But Mercedes wasn't happy about this, and instead reminded them again that they needed to take better care of Caesar. Nothing happened this time, but in the future, she demanded that the princess consort ensure this kind of thing would not happen again. Furthermore, the Baroness had not forgotten the promise the girl made to the Empress. To be precise, they had agreed that in 3 months, Caesar and she would attend a banquet together, and Irene would also teach him etiquette. Mercedes didn't want want to argue and said that if any help was needed, she was willing to provide it. Shortly after learning that both His Majesty the Emperor and Her Majesty the Empress would be attending the banquet hosted by Her Majesty the Empress, the handmaiden could hardly believe it. That's how it happened. So Irene made a request to Delphine to transform Caesar into a decent, normal person. What would this so-called transformation require? It didn't need to be perfect. Members of the royal family don't just sit in their seats. Throughout the entire banquet, all they had to do was greet others in public, sit quietly, eat, and smile. It's impossible to completely change Caesar in 3 months. So we need a little white lie to fool everyone's eyes during the banquet. We need someone who knows royal etiquette inside and out. Irene mentioned that she heard Delphine used to be in charge of jewelry at the Malachite palace. Her Highness the Princess Consort saved the girl's life, so she would do anything to help Her Highness. Usually, there are specialists in charge of the royal family's attire, but His Highness Caesar has only recently started wearing formal clothes. The princess consort could choose from the clothes she already has. Delphine said that it's customary to have new formal wear tailored before a banquet, and not doing so might send the wrong message. Just as we were talking, Countess Elvira came in, delighted to see Her Highness the Princess Consort. She snapped her fingers, and the room was filled with magnificent clothes and jewelry. These were gifts from Her Majesty the Empress. Her Majesty the Empress was deeply moved by your devotion to Caesar, and has ordered Elvira to support you both at all costs. So the Countess is at your disposal and will actively help you in accordance with Her Majesty the Empress's command. So Irene shouldn't say she failed for lack of support. The young princess consort replied that she would certainly live up to Her Majesty the Empress's favor. In fact, Irene was not satisfied with the performance of the current staff. Some of them were careless even around Caesar, so she wanted to replace most of them. Countess Elvira acted quickly, as if to prove her competence. She happily agreed to her request and replaced the staff. The menu did get much better, and these changes happened almost overnight. Even though it was Friday and we were observing Lent, a day of fasting, the meal was quite extravagant. Fortunately, Mercedes was also invested in his success. But while all this was happening, Irene suddenly noticed something unacceptable in her, Mercedes's, behavior and stopped her. She told the Baroness not to do everything for him because she shouldn't treat him like a child. Last time, Miss Flores said she would teach Caesar some rules. Mercedes made it clear she would help, but according to the Baroness, since he couldn't eat meat today, he might get sick if no one took care of him. Even so, there was no need to go that far. The princess consort was looking at us with a strange expression. Nevertheless, Mercedes was convinced that Her Highness the Princess Consort would get used to it. Seeing that the lady was about to feed Caesar again, Irene stopped her on the spot. She handed His Highness a fork, as he had used one before, and suggested he eat by himself. But the lazy crown prince just threw the fork aside. Noticing he was struggling, Mercedes rushed forward to help, but Irene told her to wait. First, Delphine handed him a clean fork to replace the one he dropped. The princess consort would repeat this process no matter how many times, until Caesar could manage on his own. She gave the prince a new fork, this time asking him not to throw the utensil. But that didn't work either. Caesar probably thought it was a game. All of this annoyed Baroness Mercedes. With every attempt the princess consort made to get Caesar to eat on his own, her anger grew. She suddenly remembered that Irene was to attend the banquet with His Highness the Prince. The Baroness was just wondering if she wasn't being a bit too ambitious. Miss Flores had that feeling again, but she really didn't think that was the case. Then, Mercedes flew into a rage, insisting that the princess consort didn't know how Caesar had lived in the past and wasn't considering his past. Irene understood her concern, as Caesar could indeed get hurt in the process. But this was absolutely what Caesar needed. No pain, no gain. These words finally enraged Mercedes completely. Now she was convinced the princess consort wanted to make a fool of Caesar. These people, this whole flashy charade. She couldn't bear to see His Highness humiliated like this. The Baroness would never let this happen. She would protect her prince. Now the heroine understood. It was an obsession a mother's love twisted like poison. She had always been uneasy about Mercedes's need for Caesar's approval and the way she treated him like a child. After Caesar's curse was revealed, most people turned their backs on him, including his own mother, the former Empress. Already in poor health, she killed herself in a fit of madness. Mercedes was the only one who took him in. The problem was that her personality was eccentric and overly emotional. If Caesar had only received this kind of one-sided affection since childhood, Irene could understand why he still hadn't matured. One thing was certain: this woman was no help to Caesar's growth, so she no longer needed the lady's help. The words struck the Baroness like a lightning bolt, and real fear flashed in her eyes. As Miss Flores said, she was retracting her previous request for assistance. From now on, she demanded that Lady Mercedes not interfere in any of Caesar's affairs. In the end, everything was resolved, although they lost 17 forks in the process. After that chaos, after Mercedes disappeared just like that, she never came back. She would probably never show her face again. Still, Irene believed it was the right decision for the future. But she suddenly wondered what Caesar thought about it. So she dared to venture, saying that Caesar might be sad because she had driven Mercedes away. The prince didn't respond. He was very good at expressing his displeasure. So Irene took his silence as tacit approval. "We have to do this now. There's no time to waste." This was our only chance to avoid being seen by the other servants. That night, Caesar slept soundly. He fell asleep even before his wife. Just then, Irene looked at her leg again and saw the wound wasn't so bad. For some reason, Caesar would stabilize after drinking blood. So Irene decided to feed him her own blood. We still don't know how he would react to someone else's blood. So this was the safest way to ensure the secret wasn't revealed. The only problem was that she couldn't hide the wound every time, but there was one place she could. A place where an occasional injury wouldn't arouse any suspicion. A place where she could find an excuse even if the wound hurt like hell. Perhaps she should call it lucky. Even this useless body had one good thing about it. Suddenly hearing Caesar's voice, Irene realized he was talking in his sleep. Who would have thought this face belonged to the cursed prince? I can't get rid of the memory of Mercedes asking her that messy question. Miss Flores could answer that question with confidence, because she had glimpsed fragments of Caesar's life. Caesar deserved to be in a warmer, brighter place because he was someone born with the right to all of it. And to make that happen, this whole process was absolutely necessary. Irene would make it happen. Caesar was raised entirely by the hands of Baroness Mercedes. He was no different from her own child, so it was her responsibility to protect Caesar. The rumor that the lowborn was still alive reached the ears of Giovanna to Flores, the eldest daughter of the ducal house of Flores. Hearing the shouting, the Duchess, her mother Celestina Flores, told her not to yell as it was unseemly. Giovanetta was furious that no one had told her about Irene. She had already prepared a dress, hat, and gloves for the funeral. Lady Celestina, afraid of rumors, told her daughter to hide such thoughts in her heart. It was a shock to her too. That girl was always surprisingly resilient. Even as a child, she wouldn't make a sound or cry even if they pinched or hit her. When her family starved her, she survived by gnawing on tree roots mixed with dirt and stale bread from the garden. They gave her impossible assignments to have the teachers punish her, but she stayed up all night and memorized every book. Giovanetta needn't worry, because her mother would not stand by and let Irene surpass her. It was time to prepare to leave for the imperial palace. Celestina would make sure her daughter could get close to the Empress. Meanwhile, the daughter of Marquis Peregrino was fighting for her life against being forced to marry someone like him. This was probably retribution for making a scene at the wedding. See, she didn't do anything wrong. She was just terrified. Irene woke up from a nightmare in a cold sweat, hearing Caesar calling her name over and over again. She was shocked that she was still alive after coughing up so much blood. Caesar had been by her side, gently wiping the tears from the corners of her eyes and telling her to get up. Seeing him so close and clear, Irene realized it was all just a dream. But she still felt like she couldn't breathe, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something so real couldn't have been just a dream. It was as if Caesar had suddenly become a different person. He stroked her head and said everything was fine. It was a little hard to believe. It sounded like he was imitating the way his wife soothed others, and it actually worked, pulling Irene back to reality. Suddenly, the crown prince said something about being pure, but he still had trouble expressing his thoughts. He grabbed her and held her so tightly that Irene's face was buried in his chest. No way. Miss Flores smelled a pleasant lavender scent. This was totally her style. So Caesar really did take a bath by himself. Now he hoped he had done a good job. Caesar, who once hated even touching water, had bathed by himself, and Irene said he did a great job. Now it was time to give Caesar this. He had worked so hard and deserved some sweet affection. In that moment, on an impulse, she leaned in so close their lips almost touched. Not quite sure what had just happened. She said it was a greeting style that had recently become popular in the capital. Caesar was so cute, she just reacted without thinking. The crown prince, following her example, also leaned in and touched his lips to her hair. He actually liked Irene, but coming from Caesar, those words probably held no romantic meaning. This girl had already charmed the crown prince, and she liked him too, even though he was sometimes scary and even hurt her. The next morning, Her Highness the Princess Consort called her handmaiden for a chat, wanting to know what Caesar's former fiancés were like. She hoped Delphine would be honest with her, as she was asking in all sincerity. Delphine hadn't personally met all of them, but she had heard from Lady Alonso about how they behaved when they were here. The previous 4 brides had all lived in the imperial palace to receive the necessary training before their weddings. Each time, there were conflicts with Lady Alonso, especially the daughter of Marquis Peregrino, who had made a huge scene at a ceremony. It was a prominent family, but Irene couldn't figure out why the name sounded so familiar. Then she suddenly remembered. In her nightmare, the Marquis's daughter didn't want to get married. That's where she had heard the name. The princess consort was sure it was Peregrino. The situation matched what she had seen in her dream perfectly. It was clear now it wasn't just a dream. This triggered the princess consort to recall some bad things from long ago. To make her feel better, Delphine suggested lighting some calming incense. When Delphine was framed, it was because of a dream Irene had the night before that she was able to expose the real culprit. When Lady Flores suddenly asked if she knew how the young lady from the Peregrino family died, the handmaiden froze. The woman who almost became the crown princess died at the hands of the cursed prince. That's how the rumors spread, and people believed them. Caesar could indeed be aggressive towards others, but it always seemed to be a way of protecting himself, not to actually hurt anyone. From what Irene had seen of Caesar so far, she just couldn't believe he was capable of such a thing. Delphine suddenly apologized, saying that someone like her wouldn't know about such matters. That being the case, the princess consort told her to forget the question and started talking about Lady Alonso instead. The handmaiden had heard that the lady hadn't left her room since this morning. She appears calm and gentle on the outside, but according to Delphine, there's something very wrong with her. The lady cares a great deal for Crown Prince Caesar. Sometimes her love is just too intense, you know? Irene was supposed to start a new lesson with Caesar today, but he suddenly disappeared. She heard a scream from high above, but the sun was too bright for her to see anything. But when a dark figure blocked the sun, she saw a person on the tower and understood what had happened. The fearless Caesar had climbed to the top of the tower and started calling out to his wife, waving happily. Just as Irene was about to tell him to be careful, Caesar slipped from the roof and fell towards the ground. Realizing he was really falling, the terrible thought that the prince was dead flashed through the girl's mind. But his happy voice and cheerful expression made Irene sigh in relief. He was fine. Miss Flores collapsed to the ground without a word, exhausted and barely able to contain her anger. She called the prince an idiot, afraid he would get hurt doing something like that. Jumping from that high up, anything could have happened. But Caesar insisted he was perfectly fine. He jumped from that height and was still unharmed. There was definitely something very strange about this. More importantly, how on earth did the prince climb up there? And what were those guards doing the whole time? Their job was to stay by the prince's side and protect him, but they were only just showing up. Pointing to the top of the tallest tower, Her Highness the Princess Consort asked if they knew Caesar had jumped from there. No one answered, so she asked again if they knew what had just happened. A faint sneer appeared under the knight's mask, but he claimed he didn't know what she was talking about. Since all was well, the knight dared to presume that nothing had happened. Presumably, no one was seriously injured. Someone fell from the top of Spire, and Irene couldn't believe he was saying nothing happened. The princess consort was sure this was something the guards should handle and vowed to report the incident. The guards roared with laughter when they heard this, wondering who she thought she was going to tell. I mean, Her Majesty the Empress ordered that everything here run smoothly. The Empress won't know about this unless the first prince tells her himself. But the knight still seriously doubted that their prince, a man who could barely speak, could do that. Irene was furious and told him to watch his words, saying she wasn't afraid to report him to His Highness. This made the guard realize that the princess consort had no idea how things really worked. Even if Her Highness the princess consort disappeared, no one would care. It would just mean one more dead princess consort. If the rumors were true, it was a complete fluke that Irene was still alive. If she died, no one would bat an eye. They would say the cursed prince had just found another scapegoat this time. Good riddance. At least she died a noble death. The knight wondered if the princess consort really wanted to disappear or was just seeking attention. Caesar was completely enraged and didn't let the knight say another word, grabbing him and lifting him off the ground. The other guards, fearing for their comrade's safety, rushed forward to help. At this rate, someone was going to get seriously hurt. Irene did her best to stop her husband, but this was a side of Caesar she had never seen before. This wild side of him was the part she had always kept at a distance. She didn't know if she could calm him down anymore. She thought she had understood Caesar, but now she wasn't even sure if this was the same person she knew. Maybe Irene was too naive to think she really knew him. Maybe she was wrong, but even so, she had to at least try to stop him. She didn't want to see Caesar hurt anyone. She believed he was better than that. She was convinced that if he did something like this, he would truly become the monster prince everyone saw him as. The moment Irene begged him to stop, the prince froze instantly, focusing on her every word. Caesar immediately pulled his wife to his side and let go of the damn knights. He handled it well. He controlled himself. They're all gone, and everything is fine now. First, Irene, thank him for listening to you and for standing up for you. If Caesar hadn't intervened, things could have been much worse. But he shouldn't attack people like that, because Miss Flores doesn't want to see him hurt others. But Caesar clearly realized that Ren was hurt. It wasn't good. Ren was hurt. So the crown prince was angry because of her. Not even because she was directly injured, but because her feelings were hurt. Actually, Irene couldn't remember anyone in her life ever getting angry for her sake. Even so, Caesar couldn't do that, or he would get into big trouble. Miss Flores really couldn't blame such a sweet little puppy. Seriously, she was convinced there was no prince more handsome than the one before her. After that chaos, the captain of the guards disappeared from our escort. No warning, no punishment. This probably meant the Empress, had taken care of it quietly. But thanks to that day, Irene now knew what she needed to do, although it was something we had to do anyway. It was time to teach His Highness Caesar everything this young princess consort knew. If he was going to attend the banquet, he needed to learn to speak more naturally. The first prince would meet many people, and he had to be able to converse with them. In any case, his language skills now were like barely being able to say 2 words, more like a toddler. If he couldn't speak fluently, at least he should learn to express his feelings clearly. Literacy would be very helpful. The problem was he wasn't interested in kittens or puppies at all. He probably didn't like them at all. At first, Irene tried to teach Caesar to spell the alphabet, spelling his name, but Caesar wasn't interested. So she showed him her name, Irene, and what do you know? A spark of interest lit up in his eyes. Suddenly, the first prince chimed in and easily spelled out Irene's nickname, Ren. Seriously, unbelievable. Caesar was now acting as if he understood everything. He easily spelled out words like cute girl and wedding cake. Irene had completely underestimated Caesar. It was clear now that he was just bored because it was too simple. Even when the princess consort decided to take his lessons to the next level, she couldn't believe what she was seeing. Caesar was doing exceptionally well. He messed up a few times at first, but now he wrote like an expert. Since he had surprised Miss Flores, she suggested he start writing in cursive. But before that, she showed him how to hold a quill, explaining that he needed to tilt the nib at just the right angle to avoid making ink blots. Surprisingly, Caesar did it well, almost too well. This was more than just being able to read and write. It was much more elegant than what I learned in my crash course at the Flores household. An impressive and regal penmanship. Miss Flores hadn't realized before that his education was incomplete. Caesar was born the first prince of the empire, the most promising heir to the throne. He must have been educated. Even if his mind was now clouded by this curse, traces of what he learned as a child remained. Ren was just wondering how many good qualities Caesar was hiding behind this damn dragon's curse. She was really curious about what kind of curse had befallen him. All we know about the curse on the first prince are the ancient legends passed down through generations. In the royal family, the legend tells of the light dragon Tigrushi who wanted to destroy the world, and how the first ruler Arcangelo, defeated him. They say an evil dragon cast a curse, but this had become nonsense. Until Caesar started showing signs of the curse. Everyone thought it was just a bunch of nonsense. Irene said that the dragon died centuries ago, but its resentment was so deep that the curse has persisted. One thing was for sure, Caesar didn't deserve this kind of treatment. Once upon a time, by a pond, there was a loving duck couple whose love produced several eggs. One of them was unusually large, but the couple thought it was just a bigger egg and continued to incubate it. The duckling that hatched from that large egg was completely different from the others. Ugly feathers and a black beak. Everything about him seemed wrong. What came out of that egg was an ugly duckling. Even his trusted mother duck turned her back on him. There was no kind old lady, no chickens, no cats. No one showed the ugly duckling any kindness. The ugly duckling fell into despair, thinking no one could ever love something so ugly. Like everyone else, this bride-to-be couldn't even imagine marrying something so monstrous. She decided to end it all, so they would all regret it. Her father forced her, and her mother didn't stop him. She just wanted them both to cry at her funeral, until she got caught up in a mysterious situation. They say water reveals your true self, and after seeing it, the girl realized she couldn't die. If she died, it would all be over. She realized that after she was dead, whether they regretted it or not would be meaningless. When she decided to go back and find a way to stop the marriage, she mysteriously fell into the clutches of a stranger. The water became her death trap. The man in the black robe used all his strength to push her down. As a final blow, he told her to stop struggling and just die. This hurts like hell, and it's useless to call for help here. I hope this is all just a nightmare. Thinking someone would wake her up, Irene stirred. She heard a voice calling her name. It happened again. She had been having nightmares every night for a week straight. Some dreams showed her things she had never seen, but she was starting to figure them out. Sometimes she was suffocated with a pillow. Other times she was shoved roughly in the dark. Sometimes she was grabbed by cruel hands, or they tampered with her food, but one thing was always the same. Irene was always a candidate for crown princess, but she was always eliminated. Girls of her age and in the same situation. If the princess consort had become a candidate earlier, she might have ended up just like them. Just as Run was wondering if she was going to lose her mind, she felt Caesar's gentle touch. He knew how to calm her down. She felt much better now, and she was grateful that he had soothed her once again since that day. Whenever she had a nightmare, Caesar would always come and wake her up, and every time he felt he should kiss her. Come to think of it, he always knew exactly when Irene was having a nightmare, and always came to wake her at just the right moment. Not expecting such a question, Caesar was a bit surprised at first, but then he said he just knew. Irene was so tired, she hadn't slept well in days. If these are just dreams, then she should just ignore them. But maybe the dream was pointing to something that really happened. Just like that time when someone stole the treasure. All the candidates for princess consort were murdered, and in the imperial palace no less. None of them deserved to die so horribly. By now, there were probably no clues left. The imperial palace had likely blamed everything on Caesar's curse. But the thought that someone must have witnessed it all gave Alina the idea to search for an eyewitness. And the key witness who should remember the events of that time was right before her very eyes. Miss Flores reminded him that there were other girls before her. The candidates for crown princess consort who had died before her arrival. Hearing this, Caesar looked surprised, as if he were hearing of their deaths for the first time. If Ellen's intuition was correct, a truly ruthless character had murdered them. But if her dream was real, then Caesar, who had always been by their side, was the most reliable witness. When the crown prince said he remembered the sound of splashing water, the girl could hardly believe her ears. So, he knew a princess had drowned in the pond. He also remembered the little ducks quacking, playing as they follow their mother. So it was just a fairy tale. Ellen had been reading him many books recently, but she hadn't expected this kind of effect. Caesar began to tell the story of the ugly duckling crying as it looked at its reflection in the river. He really liked that story, so he asked her to read it to him right now. Dealing with Caesar's stubbornness was an impossible task, making it truly difficult for Ellen to refuse. Once upon a time, by a pond, lived a loving duck couple, and the fruit of their love was a clutch of eggs. Suddenly, something Caesar blurted out made the girl look up from her book. What is love? He asked about love so casually, yet it was a complex philosophical question. Well, love is when you really like someone, just like Caesar and Lane. He liked her very much, and she liked Caesar too. The crown prince, without even realizing what he was saying, had just confessed his feelings to her. Ellen hadn't expected this, but knowing Caesar was innocent, she tried to remain calm. That being the case, she had to respond and tell him her feelings as well. It was the first time she had ever said such a thing. The girl decided to continue reading, but then Caesar suddenly started talking about the fruit of their love. The fruit of their love was laying eggs. So the crown prince asked Ellen when she would lay an egg. At first, she thought he was talking about the fairy tale, but when she realized the crown prince wanted her to lay an egg, she was left speechless. Miss Flores didn't know whether to explain that she couldn't lay eggs or to draw on her human knowledge. Caesar gave her no room to breathe, bombarding her with questions about how many eggs she would lay. And when, it seemed Ellen was now in for a real headache explaining the birds and the bees to him. She herself didn't even know where to begin. Suddenly, the crown princess consort said that if they fell asleep holding hands, an egg would naturally appear. In the end, the girl went to bed, hoping the lie would hold. It was too cruel to shatter Caesar's innocence. From now on, she would definitely have to skip certain parts like the educational content about how love creates life. All the jewelry in the shop was too ordinary. Giovanetta had come here because she'd heard they were setting a new trend. In the Duke's eyes, his daughter was flawless. He believed his wife had accumulated immense blessings, not only having such a beautiful elder daughter, but also a younger one who was about to marry the crown prince. Hearing this, the Duchess set down her teacup with a thud, and the atmosphere at the table instantly changed. The elder daughter had reportedly been the center of attention ever since her social debut. Honestly, she was a worthy heir to the esteemed Flores family. Celestina's daughter had been chosen as an attendant to Her Majesty the Empress, so she would be entering the palace soon. Just as the two were discussing their family matter, a maid walked in. She was so flustered she didn't know what to do and decided to go prepare lunch, leaving them to enjoy their time together. A panicked Alina tried to stop her to explain, but it was too late. She and Caesar had agreed to discuss this matter only in private, as such things were usually kept secret. Caesar was too naive to see the gravity of the situation, so she stopped feeding him that nonsense. From then on, Caesar remained fixated on the idea of them having a child. He didn't lose interest even after she rejected him many times. Alina hadn't expected him to be so persistent, and this matter could cause a huge uproar in the imperial palace. Even so, Caesar just asked if he should hold her hand more. He understood they had to keep it a secret when no one was around. The crown prince sneaking into the crown princess consort's bedroom. The crown princess consort lingering at the door and then leaving. It was utter chaos. At first, the maids thought they would find a dead body inside, but on the contrary, the two spent all day whispering and giggling together. Recently, someone peeked through the crack in the door and saw them sleeping in the same bed. For the crown princess consort to choose to be with that thing in the same bed. Everyone knew what happened to the last batch of maids. So until the Empress asked, they had heard nothing. But it was precisely the gossip of these maids that now made Mercedes despise that wretched woman. This morning, Ellen called Caesar to her room. She had prepared a gift for him. She handed him the egg, shyly saying that she had laid it, hoping the crown prince wouldn't suspect anything. Seeing the fruit of their love, Caesar was ecstatic. Miss Flores had a baby this morning. She had asked Elfina to get her a bird's egg. It was nothing for her, as this maid had been through thick and thin. And in Caesar's eyes, she was simply amazing. Ellen had asked the maid to bring just any egg, but no matter how one looked at it, it resembled a chicken egg. When Caesar had looked his fill, she suggested he go back to his studies and read. But upon hearing he was going to incubate it, she reminded him that the egg was fragile. Caesar promised to be careful and prepared to incubate the egg in a nest. For some reason, Ellen felt more and more that things were starting to spiral out of control. It seemed Caesar was dead set on doing this, actually planning to sleep in the nest. Now she was beginning to feel that she might have gone a little too far this time. Still, she had to play along, so she suggested that if he got uncomfortable, he could come sleep in the bed. Until late at night, the crown prince sat in his makeshift nest, carefully guarding the egg. He firmly believed this would protect Lane, the fruit of their love. In the morning, she woke up as if nothing had happened, but Caesar was nowhere to be seen. She looked down at the floor and could hardly believe her eyes. Caesar had sat on the egg all night, determined to make this miracle happen. The crown prince shared his excitement with her. Alina was sure her eyes were playing tricks on her, imagining that the egg had just moved. In that unbelievable, dreamlike moment, the eggshell cracked and a bright light emerged. It was so strange for an ordinary bird's egg to glow from within. A small, fluffy creature wriggled out of the shell. A real chick had hatched. Ellen never imagined a chick would hatch, and she had no idea what that light had been. It was the fruit of their affection, and they placed the chick by the fire of the hearth to keep it warm. All of Ellen's education and all the books she had read had never taught her how to care for a baby bird. They didn't know how to raise a chick, but Caesar suggested spraying it with some water. Just then, Delphina entered the room and was horrified to see a newborn bird on the table. It was hard to believe this was the egg from yesterday, but according to Caesar, it was the fruit of their love. Ellen herself didn't know how it had hatched, but figured there must have been a chick in the egg to begin with. But Delphina was certain that was impossible, as she had brought a very fresh egg. Chicks don't usually hatch so quickly. It takes at least 20 days of incubation. It's impossible for one to hatch in a day, and they don't fly like that either. Compared to the unpredictable crown prince before her, an extra chick was nothing. Now she was completely confused too. As the 70th generation administrator of the Holy Cross, the eldest daughter of House Florus paid her respects to the young Empress. She was the crown princess consort's older sister, and she would do whatever it took to please Her Majesty the Empress. This girl was completely different from her younger sister, so gentle and sweet. She was keenly aware that her less-than respectful sister had offended the Empress. In fact, that child had proposed a deal to her, claiming she could turn the first crown prince back into a human in exchange for a favor. Gio Veneta was very vexed that her younger sister had been so arrogant and rude before Her Majesty. The Empress thought this girl was surely wiser than her sister. Even in this situation, as the Empress, she had no choice but to remain calm. To be honest, Gio Veneta now considered herself Her Majesty's person and planned to teach her younger sister a profound lesson. The social season had kicked off, and the imperial palace was filled with a festive atmosphere. Yet here in the Malachite palace, isolated from the rest of the court, not a single sound of celebration could be heard. But this also meant the summer banquet Ellen had promised the Empress was fast approaching. With 3 months until the summer ball, Caesar, to be honest, had seemed quite stable lately. He was having almost no more episodes and could even form decent sentences. If things continued this way, having Caesar attend the banquet might no longer be a fool's dream. Of course, for that to happen, the two of them still had a great deal of work to do. Caesar named the little one Abraxas. Perhaps that was why Abu seemed so intelligent. He was even house-trained, followed only the two of them, and would quietly hide when strangers were around. Sometimes Alina even felt he could understand human speech, but that, of course, couldn't be true. Soon, Delphina came to report that a guest had arrived at the Malachite palace. The person was here to see Her Highness, but the girl found it hard to believe that someone would come all this way just for her. But when she came face to face with her, the last name the crown princess consort wanted to hear was hers. Gio Veneta, the darling of all the subjects. When Alina first entered the Flores household, Gio Veneta was a true darling. When everyone else ostracized Alina, only Gio Veneta showed any interest. The daughter of the first Duchess was quite shocked to learn that this little country bumpkin was now her sister. But in Alina's eyes, her new older sister was truly beautiful, like a real princess. In fact, it all started out well enough, with Gio Veneta looking after her and being very kind to her. She would feed the girl, who acted like a complete fool, getting excited over simple things she had never eaten before. Even if it was just a whim or a game for her, the kindness Alina felt was genuine. She also got a tutor. As she slowly began to fit into the family, Gio Veneta suddenly became as cold as ice. Alina didn't know why, so there was nothing she could do. Her sister's attitude was something Alina was forced to endure. But in a family where she had no allies, even that was precious. So she wanted to win back her sister's favor. Alina put on a beautiful dress that fit her perfectly and decided to go show her sister. But Gio Veneta was not the same as before, and she reacted fiercely to Lane wearing her dress. Even though she had given the dress to Alina herself, she demanded that she take it off at once. In the end, the Duke's adopted daughter never figured out what had truly angered Gio Veneta. From then on, she did as she pleased, making things difficult for her younger sister at every turn, as if wanting her to disappear. After the incident on the stairs, Lane stopped trying to understand her. Although Alina had always lived under her thumb, She had all but forgotten about it upon entering the imperial palace. She hadn't contacted her family since arriving, so it was only natural that they were worried sick. Looking at her younger sister, Giovanetta realized she hadn't changed a bit, even within these palace walls. Since the eldest daughter of House Flores had arrived, she decided to see just how long Lane intended to keep her guest waiting. Mistaking Caesar for a servant, she ordered him to stand up and help his master to the drawing room. She sneered that her sister hadn't trained her servants well, but Alina told her to mind her etiquette. No one could be so disrespectful to a member of the royal family. It would bring shame upon House Flores. For that matter, the crown princess consort wasn't just referring to His Highness. She expected to be addressed formally as well. If it were only about how they treated her, Alina could have ignored it as always. But here in the imperial palace, it wasn't about her own comfort. Her authority was tied to that of the first prince, Caesar. How they treated her was how they treated him. So she had to hold her head high. It was no longer about her as Miss Flores. As Caesar's crown princess consort, she had to put a stop to any act of insubordination in the palace. Seeing the royal knights behind her, Giovanetta realized how dangerous her situation was. Fearing she would bring trouble upon the entire Flores family, she bowed her head for the glory of the holy word of the cross. For the glory of the holy word of the cross, greetings to your highnesses. Alina hoped the lady would be more polite in the future. Now, she suggested they hear the details. Everything seemed calm inside, but Caesar suddenly rushed toward the guest. Approaching her, he held out his fist as if to give her something. He looked a mess, but he was cleaner up close than Giovanetta had expected. Seeing a dirty worm in his hand, the girl screamed at the top of her lungs, utterly disgusted. The great Caesar swaggered back, saying he had taken care of the problem. It was so absurd, Alina couldn't help but burst out laughing behind her sister's back. Giovanetta was livid, raging like a wild beast at what the two fools had done. That night, Alina was very surprised to hear that Caesar also had a visitor, especially at such a late hour. According to Delphina, it was Crown Prince Caesar's personal physician and royal tutor, Sir Richard, who had become the court mage through his connection to the former emperor. But like most mages, he rarely made an appearance. So Alina had Delphina ensure their guest had everything he needed. And what do you know, Giovanetta had already gone home. That girl was now the Empress's lady-in-waiting. Keeping an eye on the Empress was enough of a headache. Now she had to worry about Giovanetta as well. Noticing how hard Abraxas was trying to get her attention, she thought he was trying to cheer her up. But in that instant, everything before her eyes changed. Ellen suddenly saw a garden by a pond where her bedchamber should have been. Something very strange was happening. This was the exact view from the pond. In that moment, the crown princess consort realized this might be the place from her recurring nightmare. But she wasn't asleep at all, so why was she seeing such a vision? The thoughts were driving her mad, and that pond was constantly on her mind. She had to go there. Upon seeing his guest, His Highness Crown Prince Caesar's expression visibly changed. He was overjoyed, and Richard was happy to see him as well. It had been too long. The royal mage was curious. Since when had His Highness become like this? Had his condition stabilized? This wasn't an easily solved problem, so it was obvious that Caesar was in much better shape than before. This made Richard feel that something must have happened in his absence. The path that avoided the guards, the servant's passage, everything was exactly as it was in the vision. Everything had been blurry, the pain so intense that Alina couldn't even comprehend what was happening. But this time was different. The closer she got, the clearer the vision became. A little further, just a little further, and perhaps she could discover something. The key to the mysterious deaths of the crown princess consort candidates. As she approached the place, Alina didn't expect to see the culprit responsible for it all. A girl suddenly ran from the clutches of this monster, claiming she knew nothing. Alina couldn't believe her eyes that someone would dare to do such a thing in the imperial palace. Seeing this nightly visitor, Matthias de la Rosa immediately assumed it was his dear sister-in-law. The furious girl began to shout that he could not be allowed to do such unacceptable things in the imperial palace. So Matthias's sister-in-law was a real prude. If she couldn't understand that it's natural for men and women to be attracted to each other, but he was more interested in figuring her out, what had brought her to such a remote place late at night. It was hard for Ellen to explain that she was chasing a vision only she could see and had happened to run into this guy. On second thought, it was indeed strange that there were no guards around and that she was in such a state. Matthias assumed the girl was planning to throw herself into the water. He had thought Miss Flores was different from the other women, but it seemed that curse was truly something else. If the second prince had known, he would have collected his sample sooner. Ellen was completely certain he was a villain, declaring that it wasn't a curse and had nothing to do with Caesar's bloodline. To him, it sounded like they had all withdrawn on their own, fed up with his mess of a brother. That made sense, but the truth wasn't that they had withdrawn on their own. It was entirely possible they had been eliminated. It wasn't until she came here that Ellen was finally convinced this nightmare was more than just a dream. It was revealing the truth. The deaths of the crown princess consort candidates had been orchestrated. That sounded like the kind of talk that could get one in big trouble here. Matthias wanted to see just what nonsense this girl was spouting. This was the imperial palace, and everyone here was accountable to the emperor. And Miss Flores would have to answer for that blasphemous remark, implying that murder had occurred within these sacred palace grounds. Looking into the man's eyes, Alina felt the ground disappear beneath her feet, and all she could think of was Caesar. The crown prince's heart began to pound, as if his very soul knew Lane was in danger. Seeing what had happened, Matthias began to call out to the girl who had fallen into the water. Just then, a strange bird appeared out of nowhere and flew past him. Meanwhile, Sir Richard decided to find out the truth, not believing the story about a sudden episode. "I can't believe it, but there's a mad divine glow on His Highness." This magical light brought little Abraxas, who immediately spilled everything that had happened. Richard was stunned. It was a familiar, and he had no idea when Caesar had acquired one. The first prince, in a desperate move, shattered the glass with his fist and prepared to jump. Richard barely had time to warn him they were on the third floor before Caesar shot out like a rocket. He landed on his feet like a cat, as if he had 9 lives. Completely unharmed. Catching sight of a maid, he immediately yelled that something had happened to Lane by the pond. Just then, Alina felt like she was freezing to death. Even though she had experienced this death countless times in her nightmares, the real pain was much worse. So Lane had fought so hard to live, only for it to end like this. In what felt like the last moments of her life, she didn't even know if she could go to Annalise. Annalise had never hugged her, never held out a hand for Lane to hold, and never let her call her mom. But when people on the street threw stones, she would protect the girl, even while sick. Coughing up blood, she always put Lane first. Before Alina entered the imperial palace, Annalise was the only one who cared for her. Maybe things really would have been better if she could have been with her mother. But there was still one thing that held her back. Caesar. Ellen wanted to see him one last time. As she thought of him, his face appeared before her eyes. Just like the image of her mother, Annalise was telling her to live. When Lane finally woke up, she realized she could taste the crown prince's lips. It was their first kiss. Seeing that the girl was alive, Caesar thanked the heavens. Everything would be all right now. Just then, the royal knights, led by Countess Elvira, arrived at the pond. She demanded an explanation, stating that a maid had told her something had happened to the crown princess consort. Upon hearing the news, the countess had rushed over at once to find out what was going on. Furthermore, she was curious as to why the second prince was here. At that moment, Caesar flew into a rage, convinced that Matthias had pushed Lane into the water. But the second prince claimed he was only trying to save the lady who had fallen into the water. Since a lengthy explanation wouldn't help Ellen now, she took the blame, saying she had slipped while walking. If that was the case, everyone breathed a sigh of relief. But someone was surely suspicious of the whole affair. That lady had come out to see what the commotion was, only to witness this scene. It was then that Ellen remembered seeing that face as she fell into the pond. This moment had been a long time coming, but now, the crown princess consort had finally discovered the murderer who had eliminated the previous candidates. Baroness Mercedes had been observing the crown princess consort, and her words sounded forced. At first, she hadn't wanted to get involved, but now she decided to find out what the crown princess consort was doing here. And what's more, sneaking past her own guards late at night to end up alone with the second prince. Mercedes hadn't served her highness recently, but she was experienced and knew what kind of person Lane was. The crown princess consort had driven away all the maids and even dismissed her, the crown prince's confidant, which was reason enough for Mercedes to keep a low profile. Since this was all nonsense, Alina immediately claimed that she had met the second prince by chance. But this coincidence seemed suspicious to the lady-in-waiting. If so, then her highness had come here alone. This was the very pond where the previous candidates had taken their own lives. Things were getting interesting. But since the crown princess consort amused Matthias, he couldn't let her be driven away. So he said that he had decided to come out for a walk due to the nice weather and had happened upon the lady. It was nighttime, so she must have mistaken him for a stranger. Startled, she lost her footing and fell into the water. Since His Highness had spoken, the Countess suggested they drop the subject. Before leaving, she told the crown princess consort to take good care of herself. Even if the second prince's appearance was a coincidence, Mercedes's visit was completely unexpected. It was as if she had been watching them. No matter how much healing mana Richard used, it would all be for naught if Miss Flores kept acting this way. Having realized everything, the girl apologized to the crown prince's personal tutor. Caesar's personal tutor had poured all his healing magic into her, but he wanted to know if she had any other physical ailments. Thanks to the tutor, the crown princess consort regained her health. It was enough to keep her safe for the time being. In fact, Richard had both elven and human blood, so to be more precise, he was a half-blood. The tutor's name was Richard from the Hevelum Forest, but he said they could just call him Richard. Lord Richard surmised that the lady was already aware that the crown prince's curse had stabilized. He also asked the girl if she had been troubled by visions or auditory hallucinations since coming to the palace. Judging by Lane's reaction, it seemed to be true. So the royal mage asked her to give him her hand. Not until Caesar said it was okay did Ellen allow the mage to touch her hand. Just as Richard suspected, she possessed magical abilities, but the girl had no idea how to. That used them. The problem was, this wasn't standard magic, as the magic of the great sage Cosimo flowed within the lady. Cosimo Flores, the ancestor who defeated the mad dragon centuries ago and was granted the title of Duke. Judging from the fact that Caesar's condition had become more stable, it seemed the Flores family had not placed a seal to suppress the mad dragon. On the contrary, Cosimo Flores had cast a spell on his bloodline to soothe the mad dragon. So Ellen had that magic within her, which was why Caesar could recover by drinking her blood. The visions she was likely seeing were probably the influence of a part of the dragon's power, as the curse had been temporarily lifted. It is providence, said Richard. Providence is the power that flows through all things in the universe. With years of training, one can glimpse truth itself. So all the visions Lane saw were real. Everything she witnessed was the truth. The mage said that if it was something that had already happened, that was correct. But if she saw the future, that was another matter entirely. It sounded like foreseeing the future was not something she could do easily. But the future is not always set in stone. It is special because it is always opening up new possibilities. However, while you can change fate, interfering with cause and effect is dangerous. So Lane could use her own power to change destiny. Speaking of which, Richard wanted to study her blood. Since it was closely related to His Highness's curse, perhaps he could find a way to break it. They all ended up in the place Baroness Mercedes least expected. It had been the perfect chance to get rid of that crippled wench, but that bastard had to show up and ruin everything. To think that person is also a member of the royal family. Ugh, fate is such a bastard. Mercedes couldn't understand why another child was needed when they already had such a fine prince. Caesar will be fine, trust me. He's just under that witch's spell. Once she's gone, His Highness the Prince will return to normal. Mercedes had to do this, because she was the only one left by His Highness's side. No matter how you looked at it, it was strange for Mercedes to be there at all. Perhaps she wasn't present when the whole thing started, but she had been watching Irene since the very first day. Even if the second prince caused that incident, the girl had to be wary of Mercedes. She lied about the death of someone she had killed with her own hands, and she had to pay the price for it. Somehow, Caesar suddenly felt that Rain was unhappy. He poked her forehead, saying she was getting wrinkles here. Realizing she had made him worry, Irene told him everything was fine and pulled him closer. She didn't even know when they had become so close. But when they snuggled like this, all her worries seemed to melt away. She wondered if Caesar felt the same way. She decided to work with Lord Richard. Perhaps they could really break the curse. Caesar was already so handsome now. Irene couldn't even imagine how divinely handsome he would become. His lips had really touched hers then. The mere thought of it made her blush and turn her head away. It was all because Caesar had healed her with his kiss. But she never thought their first kiss would be like that. If it weren't for him, Irene would be dead by now. So she was endlessly grateful to her savior. The crown prince smiled, leaned down, and kissed her cheek, just as he did every day. In that moment, as if a cosmic force pulled Rain towards him, she also gently kissed his cheek. Giovanetta was determined to teach her a lesson today. It was unbelievable that she, who used to be so bold, was now cowering in fear. The maid said that the young lady had gotten into trouble last night. The eldest daughter of the Flores family couldn't believe her ears when she heard that Irene had nearly drowned in the pond. Giovanetta said it would have been better if her sister had just sunk to the bottom, but the maid reminded her that it would bring misfortune to the entire family. Martha just didn't know that Giovanetta's sister was a very stubborn girl who would never take her own life. Still, something was bothering the heiress of the Flores family. She wondered who was watching them. That very same day, Martha, as instructed by Miss Flores, brought Mrs. Rocho. Mercedes didn't know what the Crown Princess's sister wanted with her. First, the young lady said she was pleased to meet her and introduced herself as the Duke's eldest daughter, Giovanetta Flores. Mercedes thought she looked incredibly noble. This lady was completely different from that girl from the mud. If someone like her became the Crown Princess, the sight of her walking with His Highness the Prince wouldn't be such an eyesore. You'd be better off staying in the back, playing the part of the hostess, and serving the gentlemen some drinks. They would be very grateful. Still, she didn't understand why Miss Flores had summoned her here. First, Giovanetta apologized for her sister's behavior. I mean, she actually kicked Mrs. Alonso out directly. According to the young lady, Irene had always been a bit strange, but no one thought she was capable of something like that. Wiping her tears, she apologized for her sister's foolishness and for not realizing everything until now. After all, Mrs. Alonso was not only the Crown Prince's most trusted confidant, but she was also almost like a mother to him. In fact, Mercedes had only wanted to help the Crown Princess out of goodwill, but Her Highness the Crown Princess was not very appreciative. Realizing how much Mrs. Alonso had been wronged all this time, the young lady embraced her and offered to listen to everything. It seemed this handmaid's resentment ran deeper than Giovanetta had imagined. In the end, Mercedes told her everything she had been through, even apologizing for being a complete fool. Since Giovanetta was now living in the palace, she told the young lady that she could tell her if she ran into any problems. She would be happy to help in any way she could. So Mercedes suggested that the young lady could perhaps help by keeping an eye on the Crown Princess. She was just worried about His Highness the Prince, leaving him to live alone with a Crown Princess like that. Giovanetta said it was a clever idea and offered to handle everything herself. So if the Crown Princess, that girl, made any move, she would inform them. What had happened was now history, and Irene foresaw that Giovanetta and Mercedes were now colluding. In fact, she saw the people who were trying to get rid of her, and they were likely still plotting something. Fortunately, Caesar was by her side during this tense time. He held his wife and asked if she was in pain. The point is, Irene was fine for now, but that might not last long. Richard wondered if the fact that people now knew about magic was enough for him to use his influence to catch the culprit. The problem was Her Highness the Crown Princess couldn't go around telling people she had superpowers. They might think she was a witch. Richard had lost faith in humanity. People only feel safe when they label things they don't understand as evil. But since Rain had already seen it in a premonition, that future would surely come to pass if they did nothing. Hearing this, Delphina said hopefully that there must be a way, the ability to see the truth. At first, the handmaid didn't believe it, but now she was sure that her mistress had used her power on the day she saved her. Now, her life had been saved by the Crown Princess. In that case, Her Highness the Crown Princess would surely be able to overcome this crisis as well. Just as Richard had said before, fate could be changed, but they had to be careful not to sever the connections. Irene needed to think this all through, certain that Mercedes would come after her. Mrs. Iraq was a dangerous person. She had hurt many people. If Rain escaped this time, she would strike again. The incident at the pond had actually put Her Highness the Crown Princess at a disadvantage, all due to a lack of evidence. She needed a solid argument, something that would convince everyone and leave no room for excuses. Caesar's appearance was a complete surprise, and Rain immediately wanted to know what he thought of Mercedes. The prince called his wet nurse Merche. This might be the only chance to find out how he felt about her. Even though the lady had raised Caesar like her own son, Irene said she was a bad person, an absolute villain. Even after learning that Merche had done some very terrible things multiple times, Caesar said nothing. He understood. They were talking about the cause of death of the women who had been close to him. That's right, Mercedes killed them all, and now she was eager for the current crown princess to drop dead. Caesar didn't want Reign to die, so they had to stop Mercedes, and the crown prince could help. Without a doubt, Caesar would do whatever it took to protect this girl. Fortunately, Delphina and Richard immediately agreed and promised to do everything they could. Irene had expected the handmaid to agree, but elves were usually arrogant towards humans. However, the Lord agreed as well. He knew what the crown princess was thinking, but he said he couldn't refuse His Highness's request, and so it was settled. Irene laid out a clear plan of action for each of them. Shortly after, Her Highness the Crown Princess's handmaid put on a hood and slipped quietly out of the castle. But she wasn't careful enough and was spotted by a knight, and now she had nowhere to run. The guard demanded she hand over what she was hiding, and Delphina had no choice but to produce the letter. Around the same time, Giovanetta learned something she found hard to believe. It turned out Irene had written a letter to the second prince, asking him for a secret late-night meeting at the pond. So Giovanetta's sister was hooking up with another man. The Empress needed to know about this, but Miss Flores had a better idea. She had Martha prepare everything for their departure and asked about Mrs. Arancho's whereabouts. The Lord is her salvation, the shepherd who watches over her, ensuring she wants for nothing. Giovanetta was worried about her sister, yet too ashamed to speak of it to anyone. No one gave Mrs. Arancho the right to interfere with time or control the enemy's abilities. According to Giovanetta, Irene was planning another rendezvous with the second prince. Given the current situation, it was difficult for her to intervene directly. Because Mrs. Arancho was close to Caesar, Miss Flores asked her to persuade Irene to avoid a scandal. Hearing what had happened, Mercedes pleaded, believing that such a morally corrupt woman could not be the crown princess. She remembered her son when he was a baby. The lady had first met His Highness shortly after she had lost her own stillborn child. The late Adelaide had recommended her as the prince's wet nurse. Even as a newborn, Caesar possessed a power different from other children. His body and soul were magnificent. Mercedes still clearly remembered the awe she felt back then. But the good times didn't last. As a prince, he couldn't remain a child forever. When Caesar was 6, they put a sword in his hand and began his training. Life pulled him away from his surrogate nurse, and Mercedes had to accept that fact. Until that incident happened, a miracle brought that bright light back into Mercedes's arms. After that, everything returned to normal. Caesar was back by her side, and no one dared to say another word. Avoiding prying eyes, the wet nurse believed they could finally be together forever. But that day still came. The first time in the bridal chamber was indeed an accident. The bride was terrified, fell, and hit her head hard. She didn't die on the spot, but a woman so frightened by her husband's true form was not worthy of being his wife. After the first time, the second was much easier. All those brides were just spoiled little girls, completely unworthy of being with the prince. And this fifth bride was the biggest headache of them all. At first, Mrs. Arancho didn't think it was so bad. It was clear she was comfortable around His Highness. But then, that shameless, wanton woman dared to come between them. Today, it would all end. After everything, nothing would ever separate Mercedes and her son again. God would realize His mistake and send the perfect partner for Caesar. Once tonight was over, Arancho's light would return, and she and Caesar would be together again. Fighting for a cherished goal gave Mercedes greater strength. She was sticking to her plan. Abe sent a signal from her pocket, and she was immensely grateful for it. Richard knew that the bird possessed the ability to sense danger, a gift from His Highness. With everyone supporting her like this, Irene decided to trust them. These people all cared for her. As soon as our girl arrived at the pond, she could feel Mercedes lurking nearby. In fact, she had fully expected the handmaid to show up and try to kill her. It seemed too late to say it now, but Irene dropped the bombshell. She knew what Mercedes had done to the previous brides. The lady was completely bewildered. They had all been harmless. And that handmaid probably had a thing for Caesar. Mercedes only succeeded because she wasn't one for idle chatter. She did the same thing to Miss Flores. So they all went to meet their maker, because Mrs. Alonso was madly in love with Caesar. And over at the ball, Delphina was fighting desperately with the guards, trying to see Her Majesty the Empress and report everything. Countess Elvira came out, wanting to see who was making such a racket outside the Empress's chambers so late. Just then, the handmaid begged her to save Her Highness the Crown Princess. saying she was in danger, that it was very serious. Something was threatening the life of our crown princess. Meanwhile, Mrs. Alonso was brutally finishing off her son's latest bride without even blinking. For her, it was a happy day. The young lady of the floor's house was finally, truly dead. She had done it. Hearing a sound in the bushes, Mercedes pulled up her hood, deciding her business here was done. She needed to leave. In that moment, the unbelievable happened. Irene, as if resurrected, stood up completely unharmed. She screamed at the top of her lungs that someone over there had attacked her, and the whole forest stirred at her cries. The startled Mercedes tried to flee, only to fall right into magical chains. Sir Richard advised her to be quiet, as he was struggling to control a power aimed at a single person. Just then, Delphina appeared in the distance. She had brought a large crowd of people with her as witnesses. So it was Mrs. Alonso who had harmed the crown princess. The countess thus rushed over with the guards to find out what had happened. After hearing of the terrible incident, Lady Elvira demanded an explanation from the handmaid. In front of all the nobles, Mrs. Alonso was loudly accused of attempted murder, her hands stained with blood. To defend herself, the lady in turn accused the crown princess of being a witch. Otherwise, why would such a young girl be wandering here all alone? And how is she still alive after losing so much blood? Mercedes was not easy to deal with. It seemed she had come prepared. Irene declared that faith in God was not witchcraft. She had survived with the help of scriptures and a cross. Of course, it might seem strange for her to be here alone, but the girl was here to pray for the tormented soul of the previous crown princess who had drowned herself in this very pond. According to Richard, Her Highness the Crown Princess was bleeding because she was injured. If he hadn't cast a healing spell, she wouldn't have survived. Praying alone was customary, but Caesar was worried about his wife and had asked the Lord to accompany her. So His Highness, who was right there on the scene, was ready to confirm all of it. He wanted to know why Merche had done this. Attacking the crown princess while she was praying was outrageous. Come to think of it, whenever a new bride appeared, you always seemed to be very unhappy, madam. Merche claimed it was all a lie. She still saw the prince as that little child, hoping he would understand. But Caesar lashed out at her with the same fury she had used to assassinate his brides. At this rate, Mrs. Aronso might die before she was even sentenced. Just then, Irene started screaming for help, trying to stop her, but she was stunned by the sight she saw.